I spend a lot of time thinking about pixels. It's because I see a future where pixels will be everywhere, massive amounts of pixels, pixels that will be on a grand scale, covering large areas, where people, groups of people in fact, simultaneously can interact with those pixels in new ways that we've never thought of before. It's time that we plan on getting ready. The dictionary defines megapixel to be a noun representing 2 to the 20th pixels. That's just over 1 million pixels, so let's call that 1 million pixels for round numbers. A gigapixel is a lot more. It's 1,024 times more, as a matter of fact. And the dictionary defines that to be just over 1 billion pixels, but let's round that to an even billion. Megapixel displays are everywhere, literally everywhere, and frankly, that's why I think megapixels are boring. The future will be a gigapixel world where there will be massive displays of 1 billion pixels or more. That's what we need to talk about now. Pixels. Even small numbers of pixels can be exciting and beautiful. And in fact, this display here is made of crayons. It's done by Christian Fauer, and it uses the tips of crayons to create artwork. And in this case, the artist used just about 2,000 pixels in an array covering about 1/10 of a square meter, and it's beautiful. On the other hand, megapixel displays, the ones that are everywhere, can be huge. This is a particularly large one in Las Vegas. It uses 12 millimeter LEDs, and it was installed by Yesco. It covers about 1,700 square meters and has about 11 million pixels. So a megapixel sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Consider the iPad. You can hold, if you have an iPad with a Retina display, 2.4 million pixels in your hand. And in fact, if you could make a 1 square meter display with the same size pixels, you'd be able to hold over 100 million pixels in your hand. That's a lot of pixels. So a gigapixel sounds like a lot more, and it is, but it's really not if you put it in some context. So consider again the iPad Retina display. A gigapixel is only the equivalent of 317 iPad Retina displays. So a gigapixel is a number that one can come to grips with. A gigapixel is so thinkable, in fact, that there is at least one practical gigapixel display in use already. Stony Brook University in the United States has created what they call the reality deck, and it's far surpassed the gigapixel mark. It has over 1.5 billion pixels, and it was constructed with a little over 400 high-resolution 27-inch Samsung displays. And in fact, other people are thinking about gigapixel displays as well. The popular online comic XKCD often deals with technical topics. And recently they did a cartoon that showed that based on the improvements so far, Google Earth will be able to resolve down to the Planck scale by the end of the century. The Planck scale is subatomic. Now, the humor, of course, is in the reductio ad absurdum, but the point is real. Something like Moore's law is actually applying to pixels and to displays. This is very important. Other people are thinking about it. It's just that most people haven't thought much about it until now. But, well, there's always a but in the real world. Will gigapixel displays actually be practical? Will they be practical in the sense that they can be commonplace and used everywhere? It depends on a lot of factors. So for example, will they be too big to be practical? Or to be small enough, will it require pixels that are beyond the reach of today's technology? And there's practical nitty-gritty considerations too, like weight or the power consumption required for a gigapixel display. Bandwidth is something that can't be forgotten either. All of these are important factors, and they're implications that need to be considered when thinking about gigapixel displays. So let's put some serious consideration into it. I think that gigapixel displays can be shown to be practical, and sooner than most people think. And to do that, let's do some analysis. So to put size into perspective, let's pretend we're looking down at London from the sky with the help of Google Earth. On the left is Piccadilly Circus, and on the right is Leicester Square. Now, if we tried to create a gigapixel display using 12 millimeter LED panels, how much area would it cover? On this chart, we can see that it would cover whole city blocks. Well, clearly that's not practical. But it actually gets interesting if we consider some other technologies. Zooming in onto Piccadilly Circus, if we built a gigapixel using pixels the size of those used on prisms laser phosphor displays, we can see that it would be a big display, but not unimaginably so. And if we use slightly smaller pixels, like those in Translux's 1.5 millimeter LED displays, it would cover a little bit smaller area. And it would be much smaller still if we used pixels the size of those used on microtiles. These are all large displays, but again, thinkable. But it gets even more interesting if we zoom closer in onto Piccadilly Circus. Again, this shows the area covered by microtiles. But if we could make a gigapixel display with pixels the same size as those used on an iPad Retina display, a gigapixel would cover just this tiny area in yellow. So, what does this mean? It means that gigapixel displays are in fact practical. They can be of practical sizes. They can even be doable with today's technology, and they're certainly practical if we do it with slightly smaller pixels than we use today. So it's important that we consider the size of pixels, because if we really need to make pixels so tiny that they're beyond the reach of today's technology, we're just wasting our time. So let's take a deeper dive into what pixel sizes are really necessary. Again, let's look at the display in Las Vegas and let's look at the crayon art. Which image is better? Well, it turns out, if you do the numbers, that the pixel density, the actual resolution of the crayon art, is actually better. And why? Well, it's because the crayon tips, the pixels, are actually closer together in that image. So what that means, obviously, is that one's point of view matters a lot. But of course, for pixels to look good, they need to look good at any distance. And in fact, in an interactive world, we'll need pixels that look spectacular at arm's length or even closer. So we need to do some calculations to find out what that really means with regards to pixel size. So it's important that we consider what the smallest detail is that a human can resolve. Many people have studied this. So for example, Apple, when they developed the iPad Retina display, concluded that based on 20/20 vision, this needs to be about 1 arc minute. Others, like Blackwell and Sonera, have pointed out that people can have better than 20/20 vision, and consequently the pixel sizes need to be smaller still. And what does that really mean? Well, for an interactive display, we need to obviously consider the length of the arm, because one needs to be an arm's length away or closer to the pixels that you're interacting with. It turns out that for a typical North American female, the length of the arm from shoulder to fingertip is about 64 centimeters. Now, obviously you need to be slightly closer than that to the display to be able to interact with the pixels, so let's make that 50 centimeters for an 80% extended arm. That results in these numbers here, based on the criteria used by Apple, Sonera, and Blackwell. And it gives us some insight of how close you need to be to a display for pixels not to be noticeable. And you can translate that into what the pixel sizes need to be for any distance with a chart like this. So I was able to translate this through some calculations into what the pixel size needs to be for a range of distances. The viewing distance is shown on the horizontal axis and the required pixel sizes on the vertical axis. Now there's 3 lines in this chart, one for the criterion used by Apple, another for the one by Sonera, and one by Blackwell. The question is, which one should we use? So I've arbitrarily chosen the criterion used by Apple. And why is that? Well, it's because I think everyone would agree that an iPad, when viewed from the proper viewing distance, has an excellent display, and the pixels are, for most people, almost invisible. If we could achieve that with large area public displays, massive gigapixel displays, then the industry will have achieved something important indeed. And let's see how that relates to some existing technologies that the industry uses today. So for example, if we looked at how close a laser phosphor display comes to the magic number, it's within an order of magnitude. To an engineer, that's pretty good. If we look at 1.5 millimeter LED displays, they're closer still. And if we look at microtiles, they're closer still. But hold on, none of these displays are actually at the magic number. Why do they all look pretty good anyways? Well, it's because of what we're used to. A 60-inch high-definition monitor isn't anywhere close to the magic number either, and yet that's basically the standard of reference we've used so far. It's good enough, and I have to emphasize, just good enough for large area public displays, but customers were going to expect more very soon. So the question then is, how small should pixels be in the real world? Well, the answer is, of course, they need to be really small. The size depends on, of course, how you're using the pixels. So if you're viewing pixels on the wall, again using the Apple criterion, pixels should be about 0.15 millimeters in size. If you're looking at pixels on the floor, and actually people are developing floor-based displays, the pixels can be somewhat larger. And if pixels are on the ceiling, and people are doing that too, the pixels can be a bit larger still. But if we needed to choose one number that would represent the size of pixels that we should be striving for, I say it's the 0.15 millimeter size. And I've begun to call that the perfect pixel. I think that's the perfect pixel size for gigapixel interactive displays. And that's what we'll be dealing with during the rest of my talk. Now, what does a perfect pixel imply? Well, for instance, if we built a gigapixel display out of perfect pixels, it would be 22.5 square meters in size. So to put this in context, let's look at some real large area displays that exist right now. This Prism display in Canada is about 35 square meters and has just under 14 million pixels in it. But if we could make one like this, one this size, with perfect pixels, it would have over 1.5 billion pixels. That's a lot of pixels. This microtiles display in the United States is 19 square meters and has just under 60 million pixels on it. But if we could build a display like this with perfect pixels, it would be almost a gigapixel. A gigapixel display in the real world would be just a little bit bigger than this using perfect pixels. And in fact, if we took into account what perfect pixels would do for this display in Las Vegas that we talked about a few moments ago, it would be about 78.8 gigapixels if we made it with perfect pixels. Now the question is, why would you actually do that? Well, the point is, it would look so stunningly beautiful that it could be put at ground level where people, massive numbers of people, could interact directly with it. That would be something stunningly new. So, do I think that gigapixel displays will really become practical? I predict they will. I predict they're actually going to become commonplace, and I think they're going to be commonplace sooner than most people think. We're pretty close, and I can show that through some assumptions, and let's go through them. First of all, let's deal with pixel sizes. This chart shows the ratio of actual pixel sizes with real-world displays to perfect pixels. Perfect pixels are shown in the yellow bar. This chart shows that iPad Retina displays are actually smaller than the perfect pixels I think we need to have for large area displays. And in fact, perfect pixels are within a factor of 2 of the actual pixels used in real-world large area displays. So the point is, with pixel sizes, we're almost there. It's only a matter of a shrink, a minor shrink from the pixel sizes used in existing current large area displays. Now we need to talk about power. Are these displays going to require more power than can be rationally used in the real world? Well, I did another calculation. This calculation shows the amount of power that I think a gigapixel display would use. And I based it on data for existing displays, and I normalized, or attempted to normalize, all of these to displays of about 700 nits. And I did it by assuming that most of the power used in a display is for the illumination and has nothing to do with the actual number of pixels. So, taking into account the number of panels required for a gigapixel display, I came up with these numbers. And you can see that a perfect pixel display uses about 5 kilowatts. That's hardly any power at all. And in fact, some existing technologies use in the high tens and low hundreds of kilowatts. These are thinkable numbers even for existing technologies, and they're very practical numbers for perfect pixels. Now, what about weight? This chart predicts the weight of a perfect pixel display and compares it to other display technologies. Now, I presume that the weight of a gigapixel display depends primarily on the size of the display itself, and work backwards from that. These are large weights. The chart is based in kilograms, so we're talking fairly heavy displays. But if you put it in context, a gigapixel display of perfect pixels, and in fact of some other technologies too, is less than the weight of a 2013 Land Rover. The conclusion, therefore, is that a gigapixel display of a variety of technologies, in particular perfect pixels, is absolutely feasible. All of this depends, of course, on the number of panels. The number of panels influences the weight, the power, the installability, the wiring, just about every factor there is. And so let's zero in on the number of panels that would be required for a gigapixel display using current technologies and using perfect pixels. This chart shows the number of panels that would be required for a variety of displays. And I've assumed that the panel size for perfect pixels, shown in yellow, would be about 60 inches. And you can work backwards to find out how many panels you'd need for a variety of installations using a variety of technologies. For perfect pixels, it's hardly any at all. It's around 20. For microtiles, for 1.5 meter LEDs, for laser phosphor displays, the number is pretty large indeed. But it's not large at all for 4K LCDs and for perfect pixel panels in particular. This is really important. So I predict that the number of panels with today's technology is challenging but feasible, but it's absolutely feasible when we have perfect pixel size displays. And that comes back to what we talked about a while ago when we looked at the City of London. What is the overall display size for a gigapixel? And this chart summarizes my calculations with, of course, perfect pixels shown in yellow. We're talking about 20 square meters for a perfect pixel display of a gigapixel. In fact, we're talking in tens to hundreds of meters for other technologies. These are thinkable display sizes that make them practical today and absolutely practical when we have gigapixel displays. So the overall display size is practical. So in summary, based on pixel size, based on number of panels, based on display sizes, based on weight, based on power, gigapixel displays are feasible and are definitely feasible when we have perfect pixel sizes. So the question then is, will gigapixel displays really happen? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, for all the reasons that we've talked about in the last few slides. For example, display sizes will be practical. The pixels will be small enough. In fact, with iPads, they're already small enough using Retina pixels, and they're within a factor of 2 of the pixels that we practically use today in large area displays. And in fact, people are going to demand smaller pixels, perfect pixels, because they're used to them today and when they interact with tablets and with phones, and they're going to expect pixels of that quality when they interact with large area public displays out in the real world. And of course, it helps that there's an existence proof already of at least one gigapixel display out there in the world. Gigapixel displays will be feasible, but they won't be easy. They won't be easy because a number of problems need to be solved. For example, the industry needs to be able to create structures that allow these highly precise displays to be aligned very accurately and very stably. And we need to be able to match the panels accurately so that the colors are absolutely perfect, or the perfect pixels won't look perfect at all. And the tiles, of course, need to be essentially seamless, much more seamless or narrow bezeled than they are today. And we need to deal with the high bandwidth. Gigapixel displays and arrays of high resolution displays are going to require new results, new progress in bandwidth and in the controllers to manage the bandwidth and content of such high resolution displays. The industry needs to be able to deal with interactivity on a massive scale where groups of people work simultaneously but separately and interact precisely with large area displays. Gigapixel displays are going to require new ways of creating content with these massive amounts of pixels. And it's going to require new design tools to be created too. And in fact, we're going to have to find new ways to train people to be able to design content on this scale. And finally, something that's not talked about often is we're going to have to think about public policy. What will it mean when large, massively interactive displays are put in what are going to be, frankly, highly vulnerable places? What will that mean in terms of public policy and how the world at large interacts with pixels? It won't be easy. The opportunities are huge, and the rewards are going to come sooner, the sooner the industry begins to work on these important challenges. Gigapixels are in our future, our near future. Thank you.